In 2017, I made a comprehensive tutorial about Scratch. In 2019, the people at MIT have changed the whole Scratch interface, and this tutorial is an update on the previous tutorial that I made in 2017, and a link to that will be at the end of this tutorial. If you're familiar with Scratch, you'll see straight away that the online version of Scratch has changed its interface quite markedly. Everything seems to have swapped from side to side. So let's have a look around the interface. Over on the right hand side now is the stage, and on the stage, as you can see, is Oscar the cat by default. And over here you've got some controls. You've got the full screen control. We'll just click on that. And you can see we go to full screen mode, so you can see the stage. And you can also shrink the stage to give you more coding space if you wish to. But let's come back to the default view. And then down the bottom, as you always had below the stage, you have the stage view. So click on the stage view here, and you can have the container where all the sprites sit. What's immediately different, you can see here, is that the information about the sprite is always available. So once you're clicked on it, the sprite details, the XY location, which you can see if we move this around, you can see the XY points change. The direction in which he points is here, and the size here is now we've been reduced. The grow and shrink buttons have been removed, and we've now can just set the percentage size. So we can use this here to grow or shrink our sprites. And finally, we've got the view and hide options here. So that's the main kind of difference here in terms of how the sprites look on the stage. But the major difference over here is on the left. Now we've still got the code, costumes and sound blocks that we had before. But what's happened now is the look of the code blocks has been changed. All the code blocks are the same, with one notable exception, is that the drawing block has disappeared. And that's okay, because down at the very bottom left-hand corner here is the extensions block. So we click on that, and we have a whole bunch of other exciting extensions that we can add and integrate with Scratch, not least of which is the Makey Makey and the Microbit add-ons, but we're not going to look at that at the moment. But we're going to look, if you want to do some pen work, the pen tool now lives over here. So if we want to add this to our project, we just click on any of the extensions that we want to use. In this case, the pen, I shall click on that, and immediately a new block is added down here for me to use. One notable change that has been made to Scratch is the way that new sprites can be created. So if we come down to here in the bottom right hand of the screen, you can see this icon here in which we can click, and this pop-up menu appears. We can upload a sprite, we can do a random surprise, we can paint something, or we can choose a sprite. The sprites have been updated. They're a bit different, and you can look through them. Lots of them are animated. Some of the old favorites are still there, as you can see, but there's some other bits and pieces that are in there too. Look at the fantasy ones. There's some new ones. I like using Frank a lot. I think he's great. But what's really good is actually the drawing tools. So we're going to click on here, and I've made a separate tutorial. Again, I'll link this at the end of this particular video. And I just want a quick overview of the tools here. What's interesting is now, by default, the drawing is in the vector form, which is really good if you're trying to create some really good looking graphics. So I'm just going to do a quick rundown, but as I said, the tutorial I've recently made about this, I'll link to at the end of this tutorial. So we're going to choose a color, and we click on a color here. We've got gradient fill, gradient left and right, gradient up and down, and we've got a radial fill as well. We'll just do a straight color at the moment, a flat color. Going to choose a green object here, and with an outline of 4, and we're going to make a square box. So here we have an object here, and what's really useful is this tool here, the Reshape Tool. I'm going to click on that while this is still highlighted, and what we can see now is each of these points allow us to edit this shape. So for example, if I deleted that node there, click on delete, I've now made a triangle. So we can start building shapes from here like this. So I'm going to click on this node here, And up the top here, we can see we can make it curved or pointed. I'm going to click on curved, and it immediately puts a Bezier curve onto that shape. And if that was a mistake, I can click back to pointed. It makes it pointed for me. But note, look what happens when I start playing with these pins. I can now start to really kind of manipulate the shape of my object here. So if I wanted to click on this one, for example, and make that curved, it already is, I can now start dragging this around and start moving this to really start looking at what kind of a shape can I make. And we can stretch and emphasize these as we see fit. I'm going to click on here again, just see if I can make this do something a bit more. This one's still pointed, so I'm going to curve that one and drag this round like that. There we go. So you can see got some quite strong editing options here with this tool. But the other tutorial, as I said, deals with this in more detail. So I'm going to delete this and come back to here. Sounds. Let's look at sounds. Again, sounds can be added by the Sounds tab, and we can browse the Sounds tab. We can upload, obviously, use a surprise sound. We can use the record of our own sounds, and there's also the gallery. So we click on choose a sound here, and there's a whole range that we can choose from. And again, if we want to just choose electric guitar here, for example, we've added it to the sound library on that particular sprite, in this case Oscar, and we have basically done a quick overview of the new interface that is Scratch 3.0. So to remind ourselves of what Scratch is primarily for, let's start looking at the coding blocks. And as I said, not much has really changed in the code blocks at all, other than the pen tool is now considered to be an extension, which we've now added back in again. And all the blocks are the same, they just look different. They've made them look more modern, and in fact they tie in with other kind of Scratch objects like the Edison or EdScratch app, so they all look the same. So there's beginning to be uniformity across the platforms that use Scratch as their block coding program of choice. And so there's some all the usual blocks that we've used to using are still here, and they still fit together in the same way. The only difference would be looking at variables. They've now got a default my variable in here, but you still make a variable in the same way, and you come across here for, you can either assign it to for all sprites or for this sprite only. We'll just click cancel here for the moment. So let's just remind ourselves of how all these things work, and we just drag out into the main coding area here what it is that we want to do. And so when the green flag is clicked, let's just do a really simple block of code here. We're going to move 100 steps, and we're going to turn 90 degrees, and we're going to control that by repeating it 4 times. We're going to make a square, and of course we're going to draw that, so we're going to use the pen tool. So we need to make sure we put the pen down before we start. We need to set the pen color, make it purple. We need to set the pen size, make it nice and thick, make it 5, and we're going to use the repeat 4 function here. And so now if we look at this as a sentence that makes sense, we look at this and read it from top to bottom. It says when the green flag is clicked, put the pen down, set the pen color to, and of course we can change that now with these sliders in here, which is a much more efficient way of doing things. So we can get the exact color that we want. So we're just going to move this all the way up to here, say, and just play around with the saturation. Set the pen size to 5, then do what's inside the brackets 4 times, move 100 steps and turn 90 degrees. So when I execute this, I fully expect Oscar to make a square for me. And he didn't disappoint. There we go. Do it again just to prove the point. And do it again. There we go. So we've now pressed the green flag 3 times and made a square. Before I end this tutorial, I thought I would flip across to one of my other projects that I've been working on just recently. And it is a game that allows us to roll the dice. So if we just show you what this looks like. When the game has started, I'm going to press the space key and my dice roll. For 2 seconds they disappear. I press the space key again, my dice roll, I get a different number. I'll do it one more time. There we go. And what I thought I'd do is take the opportunity to explain how you can really build complex programs quite quickly, again thinking computationally, by breaking something down into its smallest object. So when I'm working with students, I get them to think about things like this and make their objective seem much simpler by breaking it down into its smallest parts. So if we disassemble this block of code here and actually start looking at what's going on here, the first thing we're looking at here is this block of code here, and this basically sets the game up, or the activity up. It basically says when the green flag is clicked, I've made a variable here called dice roll, and we want the dice roll choice to be 0. So we've simply said set the dice roll to 0 and hide. What we're hiding is actually the sprite, because this code is allocated to this particular sprite, sprite 2, my left-hand dice. And then we've got to the actual rolling section. And so this is being controlled by the space key. So I pulled this block out here. When the space key is pressed, that's how I'm controlling the roll. Then we're going to put down here. We've got the variable now, which was set to 0 beforehand. We've now asking every time the space key is pressed for the dice roll to be set to a number, and in this case it's set to a value of either between 1 and 6, and it's between 1 and 6 because we've got 6 faces on our die. And then if we click down here and look at the block, then we've got to deal with each one of those options, option 1 through to 6. So the first block we've got to look at here is this, and we use this comparative operator here and this variable called dice roll. So at the beginning we set dice roll to 0, and then we don't know what the random operator is going to pick, but in case it's 1, we've got to set a action for it to do. So if the dice roll equals 1, then do the following: switch to costume 1. So let's go and look at costume 1. So costume 1 is the 1 on the die. So I've made 6 costumes down here. Obviously costume 2 is the 2 face, the 3 face, 4 face, 5 face, and the 6 face, or the 6th costume, is the 6th option. Come back to code here. So if the dice roll equals 1, switch to costume 1. Keep it simple. That means I know it's the die. And show, because we are told it to hide at the beginning. Wait for 2 seconds, then hide it again, and set dice roll to 0. So really this entire code for the dice is basically 3 blocks of code. This one, set the dice up. This one, on the space bar, pick a random number. And this one, repeated 6 times. And all we do is change. Once I've got this bit working, I would use the duplicate function. And there we go. I've now got my duplicate function. I would change that to 2. I would change that to 2 and clip them together. And so what looks like a complicated piece of code, when it's broken down through computational thinking into its smallest element, becomes something that's much easier to put together programmatically. Because when students look at projects like this, they get incredibly intimidated by all that code. But teaching students to look at it as a series of small problems actually makes it much more manageable. And of course, all I had to do to make 2 dice was duplicate this. And if we look over here on sprite 4, all my code has already been done for me. So actually all I did in this program here was make 1 dice, repeat it, and then all of a sudden I've now got a game that works. Well, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. As promised, here are the 2 links to the videos I mentioned in this tutorial. one to the Scratch video made in 2017 and the recent video I made about the Scratch 3.0 interface using vector graphics for creating your own sprites. If you'd like to subscribe, please consider clicking on the subscribe button, and until the next tutorial, thanks for watching.